report was just looking at all of these various alternatives of what we could do, the acts that they apply under, and really what our course of action is. And what the report recommends is that we push or request the Conservation Authority to undertake this project under the Conservation Authorities Act. In doing that, it opens up two different windows for us. The first is to put it under the WECI funding, and we can make an application there if the preferred alternative that we chose would be one that would qualify. And secondly, if it also opens up the opportunity to look at sharing costs with upstream benefiting users. So the model that I've shown inside the report makes the assumption that the WECI would apply, and then just kind of the rest of the funding flows from there. And that's terrible, you know. If that funding shouldn't apply, then their qualifying statement is that remove that funding source, just plug something else in there, and the same model would apply, but the percentages might change. So I think, to be brief, I think as far as next steps go, there's two considerations that we need to, well, there's a few. First of all, is council desirous of pursuing ice management, or do we let the status quo remain? And that was a decision that was made a couple of years ago prior to this report being done. If we do move forward with ice management, then we need to look at two questions and balance them. Do we have a preferred alternative? And then do we want to push the Conservation Authority to drive it as under the Conservation Authorities Act? And I think when you're making that decision, you might want to consider, does our alternative qualify for this ECI funding? Wacky funding.
Wacky funding.
Deputy
Just before we go on to answer some of your specific questions, I'm just wondering, it wasn't clear to me in the models that you presented that there would be an option of a joint sharing of the capital costs over several municipalities, perhaps Huron or Central Huron Blue Water.
Sure. If you look at the diagram that's in here.
Yeah.
So when it shows total cost and it branches off 50% to this is just what the consultants proposed. So
yeah.
Obviously nothing's set in stone, but it's proposing 50% to the funding source, and then the remaining 50% of the capital costs be split between Lambton Shores and the Conservation Authority. And then 90% of that 50 would go to Lambton Shores, and 10% would go to the Conservation Authority to be collected through their levy. And it's through that levy where it actually gets billed back to the other municipalities that benefit from the upstream.
But I guess my picture is, I'd like to see that 90% shared by the municipalities, as opposed to the 10% through the levy. And that to me is a more cost-effective option, because we can potentially share this equipment and have so much
and I guess that's where that's more or less the next step. So with one of the pieces of direction that I'd like to get out of it tonight is whether or not we want to move on to phase 2 of the cost sharing study. And when we move on to phase 2 of that cost sharing study, that's when we start refining really what our wants and needs are. And I think that's where it would come in. This is a preliminary proposal.
So, but it is serious consideration.
Well, I think it's open for discussion, and we'd have plenty of input into the process.
We've had, in the past, we have gone to Conservation Authority with upstream owners. That's where the ice comes from, that's where the water comes from, and that approach. In the past, that has not been accepted by the Conservation Authority. The board has said, no, we'll pay our 10%, and that's the limit that they're on to. Whether the board changes, that would be part of the next step, is to find out what cost sharing, and then go to that. Councillor Ullman?
Yeah, I have a number of questions, but I guess when we're talking about those cost sharing models, I mean that is the next step, to have a variety of models developed. This is only one.
This is only one.
And based on past reports that we've received, there are a number of models, and then there's pros and cons for each one. But that's going to cost us. That will cost us. And how much will that report cost to have that actually developed after we determine the preferred solution, right?
That's right. Yes, or yes and no. I think the model that we create will be theoretical to be applied to any capital costs that
Okay.
we have. The cost
I
to move on to
have
phase,
four questions, so.
the cost to move on to phase 2 is, there's an allowance in our current PO for $10,000. Based on the cost split with the ABCA, we'd be responsible for 7,200, and that's included in our operating budget this year. Once ACOM is given the authority to go ahead, they'll firm up that number, so it could be somewhat higher, it could be somewhat less, but not exorbitantly higher than $10,000.
Is in this updated report, we've all got a copy of the 2010 report, and we got it on a disc, very large, and in this updated report, are there any significant changes from the 2010?
No, in the most recent, the 2011 report is just, its purpose was to update the cost of
The
each of the
cost.
options
So-
to a more current dollar. The 2008 report presented everything in $2008 dollars.
Okay, so the recommendation is still the selective dredging of the 4 specific areas?
Well,
Does that still come through as the recommended option?
that's one of them.
I guess my other question is about the berms. When you look at the chart, I mean, that's the only one where there's a high probability of success. The rest are all moderate.
Yes.
And even with a high probability of success, I know, when I looked up the old report, we're still talking $750,000 for something like that, but then you didn't have any qualifiers there, because in the old report, there were a number of qualifiers such as land purchases, raising roads, all kinds of things that,
And I guess the point to keep in mind about the berms is that they're not an ice jam prevention. It's dealing with the possibility of a flood when a jam does happen. So it would assist in preventing a flood, but not a physical jam.
and then the third question, the next steps would still involve all of those updatings of soundings, and all of that stuff would still have to be done at what cost?
It's not a lot of work, but again, it is a consultant and it's engineering fees, so you'd be looking at it around the area of $10,000.
To update. And then finally, just some clarification, Brent, around this whole upstream property owner issue, and just looking back on the examples where this has been refused in the past, like what are the steps that have to be taken, because it's a huge effort to determine and to assess to these upstream property owners, and we have no guarantee.
Yeah.
It could easily be refused, and then off we go to, like, then what? Is it a tribunal? What happens?
That I'm not entirely sure of. When you look at the precedent through the ABCA, there are older projects that have been done in such a manner where the upstream property owners have been assessed. As part of the cost sharing report, ACOM did a poll of other local conservation authorities, and there was no standard approach developed. Some conservation authorities don't fund anything or bill upstream owners. Some did apportion costs. Some it was 50-50. In this case, I think I think the question's been asked of the conservation authority in the past. It hasn't gotten a favorable response from them. So I think you need to push them again and then just decide whether or not you want to escalate it to the MPP level, the MP level, and start petitioning those higher levels of the government that do fund these people.
So in general, nothing has changed from 2010, 2008 and before. Huge dollars, no guarantees.
That's correct.
My opinion is the same.
Just a note on, when we originally pursued attempting to pass some of the costs on to the upstream property owners, and the authority rendered its decision, the right of appeal from the municipality is to the minister, and make the presentation to the minister, and he or she can weigh in and make a determination.
I think Councillor Scott may have a comment.
I did, yes, thank you. Through you to Brent, the bottom line is we own a marina right now, and we have to do some dredging in order for those people to be able to get their boats
Yes.
out. It is the only marina, well, it makes us money, I guess. And so if we're not going to be able to, if we decide, no, we're not dredging, then ultimately, we may not want to own a marina. Because as people go out and buy their boats, they tend to buy bigger. It just seems to be the way they go. And then we wouldn't have the availability to offer that, right? If they can't get out,